Some men are born to protect even when the world tells them they're not worthy. Cole Thatcher was one of those men, a mountain man who loved a woman far above his station, a wealthy widow named Evelyn Grant, who owned the largest ranch in Silver Creek. When the notorious Clayton Gang rode into town and took her at gunpoint, dragging her into the brutal wilderness, the townsfolk stood frozen in fear. No lawmen would follow. No ranch hands dared to chase. But Cole grabbed his rifle, saddled his horse, and rode alone into Devil's Basin, a stretch of wild country even bounty hunters wouldn't cross. He tracked them through canyons and pine forests, through rain and darkness, knowing he might not come back. Could one man's love and courage be enough to bring her home alive? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Silver Creek had the kind of beauty that made a man believe in second chances. Nestled in a valley between the Montana mountains, the town had grown prosperous from cattle and timber. Its main street lined with whitewashed storefronts and boardwalks that didn't creak too badly underfoot. It was May of 1882, and the aspens were just beginning to leaf out, their bright green a promise against the darker pines that climbed the slopes above town. The Double E Ranch sat 3 miles north, sprawling across prime grazing land that stretched to the foothills. Everyone in Silver Creek knew the brand, 2 interlocking E's that stood for Evelyn and Edmund Grant, though Edmund had been in the ground now for half a year. Art gave out one winter morning while he was checking fence lines. He was 63. She was 42. And just like that, Evelyn Grant became the wealthiest widow in the territory. She wore her grief the way she wore everything else, with dignity and a certain reserve that some folks mistook for coldness. The truth was more complicated. Evelyn had loved Edmund, though theirs had been a practical match more than a passionate one. He'd been a good man, fair and steady, and she'd honored him by learning every aspect of running the ranch. When he died, she didn't crumble. She stepped into his boots and kept the outfit running without missing a payment or losing a single head of cattle. The ranch hands respected her for that, even if some of them grumbled about taking orders from a woman. Ben Howell, the foreman, was loyal as a hound and twice as protective. He'd worked the Double E for 20 years and saw it as his duty to shield Mrs. Grant from any trouble that came her way. But there were things even Ben couldn't protect her from. Things like loneliness, like the weight of making every decision alone, like the quiet of a big house at night with no one to share it. Evelyn wore her late husband's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath her high-collared dresses. The gold band rested against her heart, a reminder of the life she'd built and the expectations that came with her position. She was Mrs. Evelyn Grant, widow of Judge Edmund Grant, owner of the finest ranch in 3 counties. That meant something. That carried weight. And weight, she'd learned, could be both armor and anchor. She had auburn hair that she kept pinned up severely, though loose strands would escape by afternoon, curling at her temples. Her eyes were gray-green, the color of sage after rain, and they took in everything without giving much away. She stood straight-backed and moved with purpose, whether she was reviewing the ledgers in her study or walking the fence lines in riding boots and a split skirt. The town ladies whispered that she was too proud, too independent, that she ought to remarry and let a man handle things properly. Evelyn heard the whispers and ignored them. She'd spent too many years being who others expected. Now she was simply trying to be herself. Cole Thatcher had left the Double E 3 years before Evelyn became a widow, though she remembered him. How could she not? He'd been different from the other ranch hands, quieter, more careful with the horses, more observant of the land. He had dark hair that curled when it got too long, and eyes the blue-gray of a winter sky. Tall and lean, with capable hands and a way of moving that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. He never spoke unless he had something worth saying, and when he did speak, people listened. She'd noticed him, though she'd never let it show. There were moments, him gentling a spooked mare with nothing but patience and a low voice. Him spotting a broken fence post before it became a problem. him tipping his hat to her with those steady eyes that seemed to see more than most men bothered to look for. Once she'd asked him about tracking, about reading sign, and he'd explained it so clearly that she'd understood for the first time how the wilderness could be read like a book if you knew the language. Then one day he was gone, collected his pay from Ben, packed his bedroll and rode out without explanation. She'd felt the absence more than she wanted to admit, but she was a married woman and he was a ranch hand, and that was the end of it. Or so she'd thought. Cole had built himself a life in the high country, living in a cabin he'd raised with his own hands near Copper Creek, 15 miles from Silver Creek as the crow flies. He trapped in winter, hunted year-round, and sold pelts and meat in town when he needed supplies. He knew the mountains the way other men knew their wives, every mood, every danger, every secret place. The Blackfoot called him Walks Quiet, because he could move through the forest without disturbing so much as a sleeping bird. He'd left the Double E because staying had become unbearable. Every day working alongside a woman he could never have, watching her move through her life with her judge husband, knowing the gulf between them was wider than any canyon. It had worn him down to nothing. So he'd walked away and tried to build a life where that particular ache couldn't reach him. It hadn't worked as well as he'd hoped. He still came to Silver Creek every few weeks, selling his goods and restocking his supplies. And if his path happened to take him past the Double E, if he happened to catch glimpses of Evelyn riding her property or walking from the big house to the barn, well, that was just coincidence. When he heard that Judge Grant had died, he'd felt a complicated twist of emotions, sorrow for her loss, shame at the small flicker of hope that sparked despite himself, and then the crushing certainty that nothing had really changed. She was still the wealthy widow of a respected judge. He was still a mountain man living alone in a cabin. Some distances couldn't be crossed, no matter what your heart wanted. Sheriff Tom Dodson had been keeping the peace in Silver Creek for going on 12 years. He was 58, with a grey moustache and a paunch that suggested he enjoyed his wife's cooking more than chasing outlaws. He was a decent man, fair and honest, but he'd grown comfortable. The worst trouble he usually dealt with was drunk cowboys on Saturday night or the occasional dispute over water rights. The jail cells mostly sat empty. Tom knew Cole Thatcher from his occasional visits to town, and he respected the younger man's skills, even if he didn't quite understand the choice to live alone in the wilderness. He also knew that Cole had worked the Double E years back, though he'd never asked why Cole left. Some things were private, and Tom believed in minding his own business, unless it became law business. The town itself hummed with the quiet industry of late spring. The sawmill ran 6 days a week. The general store did steady business. The church bell rang every Sunday morning, calling the faithful to services where Reverend Matthews preached temperance and charity in equal measure. It was a good town, a safe town, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played in the streets until dark. But safety, like anything else, was a fragile thing, and the world beyond Silver Creek's peaceful valley was bigger and rougher than most of its citizens cared to remember. Out there in the wild territories, men like the Clayton Gang moved through the shadows, leaving wreckage in their wake. Rumors had been drifting in for weeks. The gang had hit a bank in Billings. They'd rustled cattle from a spread over in Wyoming. They'd killed a deputy in a shootout near the border. Each story was worse than the last, and each one was met with the same response in Silver Creek: that was happening somewhere else, to someone else. It couldn't happen here. Evelyn had heard the rumors too, and unlike most of the town, she'd paid attention. She'd asked Ben to post extra guards at night, to keep the hands alert. Ben had humored her, but she could tell he thought she was being overly cautious. The Double E was too big, too well defended, too far from the usual outlaw routes. No one would be foolish enough to target them. She'd wanted to believe that. But something in her gut, call it intuition, call it the same instinct that had kept her ranch solvent through drought and hard winters, told her the danger was closer than anyone wanted to admit. She was right. They came at dawn, when the mist still hung low in the valleys, and most folks were just stirring from sleep. 6 riders, moving with the kind of purpose that suggested they'd planned this down to the minute. They entered Silver Creek from the east, their horses' hooves muffled by the dirt street, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats pulled low. Silas Clayton rode at the front, a man whose reputation preceded him like a cold wind. He was 43, lean and hard as jerky, with eyes the color of dirty ice and a mouth that curved naturally toward cruelty. He'd spent 15 years building his gang and his legend, robbing banks and stages from Colorado to Montana, always staying one step ahead of the law. But this wasn't about money. Not this time. The first shots came as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, shattering the morning quiet like glass. They hit the bank first, 2 men inside, while the others held the street. The bank manager, Harold Peterson, had just unlocked the door when they burst through. 5 minutes later, they emerged with saddlebags full of cash, but that was just the opening act. Silas sat his horse in the middle of Main Street and fired 3 shots into the air. Windows along the street filled with frightened faces. Sheriff Dodson stumbled out of his office, still buttoning his vest, his hand hovering near his holster but not quite touching it. He was badly outnumbered, and he knew it. "Nobody moves, nobody dies," Silas called out, his voice carrying clear in the cool morning air. "We'll be gone in 10 minutes, and you can all go back to your boring little lives." But then his eyes found what he'd really come for. Through the window of the general store, he saw her, Evelyn Grant, up early to place an order for ranch supplies. She stood frozen behind the glass, her face pale but composed, those gray-green eyes taking in everything. "Well now," Silas said, a terrible smile spreading across his face. "Boys, I think we just found ourselves something worth more than all the gold in that bank." 2 of his men dismounted and kicked in the door of the general store. Evelyn backed away, her hand reaching for the small pistol she kept in her bag, but they were too fast. One of them, a thick-necked brute named Rake, grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. The pistol clattered to the floor. "Let me go," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. "You have your money. Leave this town in peace." Silas dismounted and walked into the store, his spurs jingling with each step. He stood close to her, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You don't remember me, do you, Mrs. Grant?" "Course you wouldn't. You were too busy being the judge's wife to notice the people whose lives he destroyed." "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn said, though something in his eyes sent ice through her stomach. "Your husband, Judge Edmund Grant, he sentenced my father to hang. Said he murdered a man in a bar fight. My father was defending himself, but your husband didn't care about the truth. He just wanted to make an example." Silas's voice was soft, almost conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. "They hanged him on a Tuesday. I was 13 years old. I watched." Evelyn's mind raced, trying to remember, but Edmund had presided over hundreds of cases. She couldn't recall every verdict, every sentence. "If there was an injustice—" "Oh, there was an injustice, Mrs. Grant, and now you're going to pay for it." He grabbed her other arm and dragged her toward the door. Evelyn fought, her boots scraping against the wooden floor, but Rake lifted her bodily and carried her out to the street. The entire town watched as they threw her onto a horse, her hands quickly bound with rough rope. Sheriff Dodson took a step forward, his face red with impotent rage. "You can't do this, Clayton. Let her go, and maybe I won't hunt you to the ends of the earth." Silas laughed, a sound without humor. "You won't do anything, old man. None of you will." He swept his gaze across the gathered townspeople. "Anyone follows us, she dies. Anyone sends a telegram, she dies. You want her back, you'll get a ransom demand in a few days. Until then, she's our guest." Evelyn's shawl, a cream-colored piece of fine wool that had been her mother's, caught on the saddle horn and tore free as they wheeled the horses around. It fell to the dirt street, a pale splash against the brown earth. The only piece of her left behind. They rode north, hard and fast, leaving Silver Creek in stunned silence. Cole had been in town selling pelts to the tanner when the shooting started. He'd stepped out of the tannery just in time to see them drag Evelyn from the general store. His body went cold, then hot, every instinct screaming at him to move, to act. But 6 armed men in the middle of the street. That was suicide, not rescue. He watched them ride out with her, watched the dust settle behind their horses, and felt something crack open inside his chest. All the years of keeping his distance, of telling himself she was beyond his reach, of trying to bury what he felt, none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was that they had her, and she was in mortal danger. Cole ran to the livery where he'd stabled his horse. The stable boy was standing in the doorway, white-faced and shaking. "Did you see that, Mr. Thatcher? Did you see what they done?" "I saw." Cole's hands were already working, throwing his saddle on his horse, checking the cinch, loading his saddlebags with the supplies he'd need. His Winchester rifle was already in its scabbard. He checked his ammunition. 30 rounds plus what was in the rifle. His hunting knife hung from his belt. It would have to be enough. Sheriff Dodson came running up, 3 other men behind him.
"Cole, we're forming a posse."
"Need every man who can ride and shoot." Cole paused in his preparations and looked at the sheriff. Tom Dodson was a good man, but he was soft from years of easy living. The men with him were merchants and ranchers, not trackers or fighters. They'd be loud and slow, and the Clayton Gang would hear them coming from a mile away. "How long to get your posse together, Sheriff?" Cole asked quietly. "An hour, maybe 2. Need to get horses, supplies, deputize the men. They'll be 10 miles gone by then, and they'll have had time to set up ambushes along the trail. Time you get organized, Mrs. Grant could be dead." Dodson's face reddened. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting I go now, alone. I can move faster, quieter. I know that country better than any man alive, and I know how to track. 1 man against 6. One of the other men, Pete Donovan, who owned the feed store, shook his head. "That's not a rescue, that's suicide." Cole swung into his saddle, his jaw set. "Maybe, but I'm not going to stand here talking while they take her farther away." He looked at the sheriff. "Give me 2 days. If I'm not back by then, send your posse. But right now, I'm her best chance." Before anyone could argue further, Cole spurred his horse and rode north, following the obvious trail the gang had left. His mind was already working, reading the signs, calculating distances and times. They had maybe 30 minutes head start. They'd ride hard at first to put distance between them and the town, then slow to conserve their horses. They'd be heading for rough country, somewhere defensible, Devil's Basin. That's where they'd go. It had to be. 30 square miles of canyons and pine forest, with 100 places to hide, and only a few ways in or out. It was exactly the kind of territory outlaws loved and lawmen feared. Cole had trapped and hunted Devil's Basin for 3 years. He knew every creek, every game trail, every box canyon and hidden pass. If they took Evelyn there, they were stepping onto his ground. And on his ground 1 man could be worth 6. He pushed his horse into a steady lope, his eyes on the trail ahead. The sun was climbing now, burning off the mist, and he could see their tracks clearly. 6 shod horses, 1 carrying double weight. That would slow them down, give him an advantage. His hand touched the stock of his rifle, drawing comfort from the familiar wood and steel. This weapon had fed him through 3 winters. Now it might be the tool that saved the woman he'd never stopped loving. Cole Thatcher had left Silver Creek behind before, walked away from Evelyn Grant because the distance between them seemed impossible to cross. But that was before someone had taken her at gunpoint, before her life hung in the balance. Now the only distance that mattered was the one between him and the Clayton Gang, and he was closing it with every stride his horse took. The trail led through familiar country at first, rolling grassland that gave way to scrub pine and rocky outcroppings. Cole read the signs like words on a page. Here they'd paused to tighten a saddle. There, 1 horse had stumbled slightly, scattering stones. The tracks were fresh, maybe 45 minutes old now. He was gaining. His mind kept circling back to that moment in the street, the look in Evelyn's eyes as they dragged her away. There'd been fear, yes, but also something else, a kind of fierce determination not to break. That was Evelyn through and through. She'd faced death itself, with her chin up and her back straight. The memory carried him back 3 years, to a spring morning not unlike this one. He'd been mending fence on the north pasture when she'd ridden up on her chestnut mare. She dismounted and walked over to where he was working. and for a moment they just stood there in the morning sun while the wind moved through the grass. "Mr. Thatcher," she'd said, and her voice had been soft, almost hesitant. "I wanted to thank you for what you did last week. Ben told me you stayed up all night with that foaling mare, that you saved both her and the colt when we might have lost them both." He'd shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "No," she'd said, and she'd looked at him directly, those grey-green eyes seeing more than he wanted them to see. "It was more than that. You have a gift with animals, a patience and understanding that can't be taught. I want you to know I see it, and I'm grateful for it." That was all. Just a few kind words. But the way she'd looked at him, the genuine warmth in her voice, it had cracked something open inside him that he'd never quite managed to close again. A week later, he'd collected his pay and left. Because staying near her while knowing she could never be his was a special kind of torture. Now here he was, tracking the men who'd taken her, and all that careful distance he'd maintained meant nothing. It had never meant anything. You couldn't walk away from what you felt. You could only pretend you had. The tracks led steadily north and west, climbing into rougher terrain. The gang was pushing hard, not bothering to hide their trail. Why would they? They had a hostage and superior numbers. They probably figured no one would be foolish enough to follow. Around midday, Cole found where they'd stopped to water their horses at a creek. He dismounted and studied the ground carefully. 6 sets of boot prints. One smaller set, Evelyn's riding boots. She'd stood here by this tree while they drank and refilled canteens. He could picture her, hands bound, watching for any chance to escape or leave a sign. And then he saw it, caught on a low branch, barely visible unless you were looking. A small square of fabric, cream-colored wool. Part of her shawl. She deliberately caught it on the branch, leaving him a marker. Cole's throat tightened. She knew someone was following. Somehow she knew, and she was helping him track her. He carefully removed the fabric and tucked it inside his shirt, close to his heart. Then he remounted and continued on, his resolve hardening into something like steel. The afternoon brought the first real complication. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and threatening. Cole watched them build, calculating. Rain would wash out the trail, make tracking nearly impossible. But it would also slow the gang down, make them seek shelter. There were advantages and disadvantages either way. The rain hit hard, an hour later, cold and driving. Cole pulled his oilskin coat tight and kept riding, head down against the wind. The trail became harder to follow, but not impossible. Fresh mud held hoofprints better than dry ground, at least for a while. He pressed on, trusting his knowledge of the terrain as much as his eyes, as the sun began to sink toward the mountains. Still hidden behind the storm clouds, Cole met a traveler coming south, an old preacher on a mule. His black coat soaked through despite his rain slicker. "Evening, friend," the preacher called out, pulling his mule to a stop. "You're heading into rough weather and rougher country." "Can't be helped," Cole said. "You seen 6 riders come through here, one of them carrying a woman?" The preacher's face grew solemn. "I saw them about 2 hours back. They stopped me, asked if I'd seen any posses or lawmen. I told them the truth, I hadn't seen anyone. They let me pass, but not before I got a good look. The woman, was she hurt? Frightened, I'd say, but not harmed. Not yet, anyway. She sat straight in the saddle despite her hands being bound. Proud bearing, that one. But those men," the preacher shook his head. "I've seen evil in my years of traveling this territory, son, and I saw it in their eyes. Especially the leader, pale eyes, hard face. He looked at that woman like she was already dead." Cole's hands tightened on his reins. "You know who they are? The Clayton Gang, if the descriptions I've heard are accurate. Silas Clayton and 5 of his men. They've killed lawmen before, left a trail of bodies from here to Colorado. They're heading deeper into Devil's Basin, into country where the law won't follow." "I'm following," Cole said quietly. The preacher studied him for a long moment. "1 man against 6? That's not courage, friend. That's foolishness dressed up as bravery." "Maybe, but I can't leave her to them. She means something to you, this woman?" Cole didn't answer immediately. The rain drummed on his hat, ran down his face. Finally, he said, "She's the reason I get up in the morning, even though she doesn't know it. She's the last thought I have before sleep. She's worth 6 men or 60. I won't leave her." The preacher nodded slowly, understanding in his weathered face. "Then may God go with you, son, and may your aim be true." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small Bible, pressed it into Cole's hand. "Take this. You might need his word before this is done." Cole accepted it, tucked it inside his coat. "Thank you, Reverend. What's your name, so I know who to pray for?" "Cole Thatcher. I'll remember you in my prayers, Cole Thatcher. And the woman, what's her name?" "Evelyn Grant." The preacher nodded, then urged his mule forward, heading south towards safety and civilization. Cole watched him go, then turned his horse north again, into the gathering darkness and the storm. The rain continued through the night, but Cole didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Every hour he delayed was an hour Silas Clayton had to entrench himself, to reach whatever hideout he'd chosen, to do whatever he planned to do to Evelyn. That thought kept Cole moving when exhaustion pulled at him, when the cold rain seeped through his clothes and chilled him to the bone. He'd failed someone once before, his younger sister Sarah, who died in a house fire when Cole was 17. He'd been in town that day, and by the time he got home, the cabin was engulfed. He'd tried to go in after her, had gotten as far as the doorway before the smoke and heat drove him back. He'd stood there helpless while his baby sister died, and he'd carried that failure every day since. He wouldn't fail again. He couldn't. If it cost him his life to save Evelyn Grant, that was a price he'd pay gladly. As dawn approached, grey and sullen through the continuing rain, Cole found himself entering Devil's Basin proper. The terrain changed dramatically here. Steep canyon walls, dense stands of pine, creeks swollen with runoff. This was wild country, dangerous country, the kind of place where a man could disappear and never be found. But Cole knew it intimately. He'd spent 3 winters trapping here, had walked every ridge and forded every stream. The wilderness might hide the Clayton Gang, but it would also hide him. And in this place, being invisible was sometimes better than being strong. He found their trail again, where they'd sheltered under an overhang during the worst of the rain. The tracks led deeper into the basin, following a game trail Cole recognized. They were heading toward the old mining camp at Devil's Pass, abandoned 15 years ago, when the silver ran out. But the buildings would still be standing. Defensible position, water nearby, only 2 ways, in or out. Cole smiled without humor. They'd chosen well, but they didn't know he was coming. And they didn't know this land the way he did. He urged his horse forward. The rain finally beginning to ease, as pale light spread across the eastern sky. The locket pressed against Evelyn's chest, hidden beneath her dress. It was the only personal item they'd allowed her to keep, probably because it was worthless to them, just a gold oval on a thin chain, no gems or significant monetary value. But inside, it held a small photograph of Edmund, taken 2 years before his death. She opened it now in the dim light of her prison room, studying his familiar features. He'd been a good husband. Not the great love poets wrote about, but solid and dependable. He'd treated her with respect, valued her mind, included her in decisions about the ranch. When he died, she'd grieved genuinely. But if she was honest with herself, and here facing possible death, there was no point in anything but honesty. She'd never felt the kind of passion that made your heart race and your breath catch, until a quiet ranch hand with blue-gray eyes had looked at her one spring morning, and she'd felt something stir that she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. She closed the locket carefully and tucked it back beneath her collar. Edmund would understand, she thought. He'd been a practical man. He'd want her to survive, to fight, to take whatever happiness she could find in this uncertain world. The question was whether she'd get that chance. 4 days now since they'd taken her from Silver Creek. 4 days of fear and uncertainty, and Silas's cold hatred. She tried to count her blessings. They hadn't hurt her badly yet, just that one slap. They fed her, gave her water, let her maintain a minimum of dignity. But she knew that was temporary. Silas was playing with her the way a cat plays with a mouse before the kill. She heard voices downstairs, raised in argument. This had been happening more frequently. The gang was fracturing under the strain of isolation and Silas's increasingly erratic leadership. Dutch wanted to leave, take the bank money and head for Mexico. Billy thought they should kill her now and avoid the risk of a rescue attempt. Garson remained silent as always, a cipher. And Jack was wavering. She could feel it. The seeds she'd planted were taking root. Footsteps on the stairs again. Evelyn stood, squared her shoulders, prepared herself for whatever came next. But it was just Jack with her dinner. More beans, a piece of dried beef, and blessedly a cup of hot coffee. "Thank you," she said quietly as he set the plate down. Jack hesitated at the door. "We're sending the ransom demand tomorrow. Ryder's gonna take it to your ranch. 20,000 in 3 days, or—" He stopped, couldn't finish the sentence. "Or Silas kills me." "Yeah." Evelyn picked up the coffee, let the warmth seep into her hands. "Can your foreman raise that much, Ben? Maybe if he sold cattle, cleaned out the ranch account. But not in 3 days. It's impossible. That's the point, isn't it? Silas doesn't want the money. He wants an excuse." Jack looked miserable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Grant, I truly am. If I'd known what this was about, what he really planned—" "You'd have what? Chosen a different gang to ride with?" Evelyn softened her tone. "I know you're not like him, Jack. I know you're better than this. But knowing it doesn't change anything unless you act. I can't. You don't understand. Silas, he's got this hold on people. He makes you believe the whole world's against you, that the only family you've got is the gang. And if you betray the family, then you die. Yes, you've explained that." Evelyn sipped her coffee, thinking, "What if I could promise you protection? Real protection, not just pretty words. What if someone was coming who could stand against Silas?" Jack's laugh was bitter. "Who? That sheriff from Silver Creek? He's probably still organizing his posse, and by the time they get here, we'll be long gone. What if it wasn't the sheriff?" Something in her tone made Jack look at her sharply. "What do you know?" "I know that someone is out there. I can feel it. Someone who knows this country, who can move through it like a ghost. Someone who won't give up until I'm safe." She met his eyes directly. "Someone is coming for me, Jack. And when he gets here, you're going to have to choose which side you're on." Jack stared at her for a long moment, something like hope and fear warring in his expression. Then he shook his head. "You're dreaming, ma'am. Wishful thinking because you can't stand the reality. Maybe, or maybe I know something you don't." Evelyn smiled slightly. 3 years ago, a man worked on my ranch. Cole Thatcher. Quiet man, kept to himself, but everyone knew he was the best tracker in the territory. He could read sign that other men couldn't see, move through the forest without disturbing a leaf. The Blackfoot called him Walks Quiet, so he was there when you took me. I saw him in the crowd, and if I know anything about Cole Thatcher, it's that he doesn't let things go, especially people he cares about." Jack's face showed his doubt, but also a flicker of unease. "Even if this Thatcher fellow followed us, he's one man. 6 against 1. Those aren't odds anyone survives. You've never met Cole Thatcher. Out here in this wilderness, he's worth 6 of you." Evelyn said it with absolute conviction. "So when the time comes, when he makes his move, you decide. You can die with Silas, or you can live with a clear conscience. Your choice." After Jack left, Evelyn returned to the window. The sun had set, leaving the canyon in deep shadow. Stars were beginning to appear in the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and closed her eyes. "I'm ready," she whispered to the darkness. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here. I'm waiting. I'm strong enough." The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the distant howl of wolves. And somewhere in that wilderness, unseen and patient, a mountain man prepared to risk everything for the woman he'd never stopped loving. Evelyn opened her eyes and saw her own reflection in the darkening glass. A woman who'd survived a husband's death, a rancher's demands, and now 4 days of captivity. She looked different than she had in Silver Creek. Harder, maybe. More certain of what mattered. The social divide that had once seemed insurmountable, the wealthy widow and the ranch hand, felt laughable now. Out here, facing death, she understood what Edmund had known all along. Worth wasn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds. It was measured in character, in courage, in the willingness to stand up when others stayed down. And Cole Thatcher had more of that kind of worth than any man she'd ever known. "Come find me," she said to the night. I'll be ready. Cole found the cabin purely by chance, a stroke of luck that felt almost like providence. He'd been scouting alternate routes away from the mining camp, planning escape paths for when he got Evelyn out, and he'd spotted the collapsed roof through the trees. An old trapper's shelter, abandoned years ago but not yet reclaimed completely by the forest. He approached carefully, rifle ready, but the place was clearly empty. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. Inside, debris covered the floor, leaves, pine needles, the remains of a pack rat's nest. But there were also signs of recent occupation. A fire pit with ashes less than a week old, footprints in the dust, food scraps that hadn't fully rotted. Someone had been here recently. And given the location, just 2 miles from the mining camp, hidden in a dense stand of pine, Cole had a good idea who. He searched the cabin methodically, looking for anything that might tell him more about the Clayton Gang, their plans, their weaknesses. In the corner, beneath a loose floorboard, he found a saddlebag. Inside it were supplies, dried meat, ammunition, a spare shirt, and folded carefully at the bottom, a letter. The paper was old, yellowed with age, the creases worn soft from repeated folding and unfolding. Cole carried it to the doorway, where the light was better, and began to read. The handwriting was crude but legible. The words of a man with limited education but deep feeling. My dear boy Silas, if you are reading this, then the judge has given his verdict and I am to hang. I want you to know the truth of what happened that night in the saloon, though I fear it will do no good now. Thomas Garrett came at me with a knife. We had argued over cards. He said I cheated, though I swear on your mother's grave, I did not. He was drunk and mean, and when I turned to leave, he came after me. I defended myself, Silas. It was his life or mine, and I chose to live for your sake. But Judge Grant says different. He says I murdered an unarmed man. Says witnesses placed the knife in my hand, not Garrett's. But those witnesses are Garrett's friends, and they lie. The judge will not hear the truth. He is friends with Garrett's family, and I think he decided my guilt before the trial ever started. I am not a good man, Silas. I have drunk too much and fought too much and been a poor father since your mother died. But I am not a murderer, and I am going to die for a crime I did not commit. Do not seek revenge. That is my dying wish. Take care of yourself, make a better life than I gave you, and forget the name Grant. Revenge will only lead you to the same rope that will take me, your loving father, Samuel Clayton. The date on the letter was June 14th, 1867, 15 years ago. Cole read it twice, his mind working through the implications. This changed everything. If Samuel Clayton had been innocent, if the trial had been unfair, then Silas's rage had some foundation beyond simple outlaw meanness. It didn't excuse the kidnapping, didn't make what he was doing to Evelyn right. But it explained the depth of his hatred, the personal nature of his revenge. But there was something else, something that nagged at Cole as he reread the letter. He'd known Judge Edmund Grant by reputation, had heard the ranch hands talk about him. By all accounts, he'd been a fair man, honest and careful in his judgments. Not the kind of judge who'd railroad an innocent man. Cole folded the letter and tucked it inside his coat. He'd need to show this to Evelyn, see if she knew anything about the trial. But even if Samuel Clayton had been innocent, that didn't change the present reality. Silas had to be stopped, and Evelyn had to be saved. As Cole left the cabin and headed back toward his observation point, pieces started falling into place. The mining camp was just a temporary holding location. Silas was waiting for something. Probably waiting for the ransom demand to be refused, giving him his excuse to carry out whatever final revenge he'd planned. But where would he take Evelyn for that? Surely not here, where a determined posse might eventually find them. No, there had to be another location. Somewhere more remote, more permanent. Somewhere Silas had prepared in advance. Cole reached his camp as darkness fell and settled in to watch the mining camp. But his mind kept working at the problem. He'd been so focused on the immediate rescue that he hadn't thought about the larger picture. What was Silas's endgame? Around midnight, he got his answer. The door to the mining camp opened, and Silas stepped out with Dutch. They stood in the moonlight, their voices carrying faintly across the canyon. Cole couldn't make out words, but the body language was clear. An argument. Dutch gesturing to the south, back toward civilization. Silas shaking his head, pointing north, deeper into the wilderness. North, toward the high country, where the mountains became truly impassable, where even in May, snow still clung to the peaks. There was nothing up there but wilderness and death, unless you knew about the old Hudson's Bay Company trading post. The realization hit Cole like a physical blow. The trading post had been abandoned 30 years ago when the fur trade died out. It sat in a high valley, accessible only through a narrow pass that was closed by snow 8 months of the year. But the pass would be open now, and the buildings, built to last by men who knew how to survive winters that could kill, would still be standing. That's where Silas was planning to take Evelyn, up into the high country where no posse would follow, where he could take his time with whatever torture he'd imagined as fitting revenge for his father's death. Cole's blood ran cold. If they reached that trading post, Evelyn was as good as dead. No one would find her up there. No one except Cole, and by the time he tracked them through that terrain, it might be too late. He had to move tonight. Not tomorrow, not the next night. Tonight. Before Silas decided to relocate to his final stronghold, Cole began preparing immediately, working in the darkness with the efficiency of long practice. He checked his rifle, loaded extra cartridges into his pockets, strapped his hunting knife to his belt where he could reach it quickly, coiled his rope and slung it over his shoulder. The plan was simple because it had to be. Anything complex would have too many points of failure. Wait until the darkest part of night, between moonset and dawn. Climb the canyon wall to Evelyn's window. Get her out. Run for the horses he'd spotted in the corral. Ride hard and fast, using every bit of his knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of pursuit. Simple, nearly impossible. But there was no other choice. At 3 a.m, with the moon down and the stars brilliant overhead, Cole made his move. He crossed the canyon floor like a ghost, using every bit of cover, freezing when the guard's circuit brought him close, moving again when the man's back was turned. The canyon wall behind the mining camp was steep but climbable, broken by ledges and the twisted roots of pines that had found purchase in the rock. Cole had climbed worse. He started up, testing each handhold carefully, moving with painful slowness. A dislodged rock, a snapped branch. Any sound would bring the guard running, 20 feet up, 30. The window was 40 feet above the canyon floor, and Cole's arms were beginning to burn with the strain. He found a ledge and rested briefly, looking up at his goal. The window was dark, but he could make out the frame, the glass reflecting starlight. Just as he was about to continue climbing, he heard voices from inside the building, loud voices, angry. The sound of furniture breaking, men shouting. Something had gone wrong inside. An argument that had turned violent, and that could work in his favor. Distraction, chaos, attention focused inward instead of outward. Cole resumed climbing, faster now, taking risks he wouldn't normally take. He reached the level of the window and worked his way along a narrow ledge until he was right outside it. Through the glass, he could see Evelyn sitting on a bed, her head turned toward the door where the shouting was coming from. She looked frightened but alert. Cole tapped lightly on the glass. Once, twice. She turned, her eyes widening when she saw him. For a moment they just looked at each other through the window. The wealthy widow and the mountain man. All the years and distance between them collapsing into this single moment of recognition and desperate hope. Then Evelyn moved, quickly and quietly. She crossed to the window and tried to open it, but it was nailed shut. She looked at Cole, shook her head. He understood. Drew his knife and began working the blade under the window frame, prying gently but firmly. The wood was old, soft with rot. It gave more easily than he'd expected. The nails squeaked as they pulled free, each sound making him wince, but the shouting downstairs covered it. The window came free. Evelyn pushed it open. Cool night air rushed in. "Cole," she whispered, and his name on her lips was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. "We have to go now. Can you climb?" She looked at the sheer drop below the window and swallowed hard. but she nodded. "With you, I can." Cole helped Evelyn through the window, his hands steady on her arms as she maneuvered onto the narrow ledge. She was shaking, fear or cold or both, but she didn't hesitate. Her trust in him was absolute, and the weight of that trust settled on his shoulders like a physical thing. "Put your feet where I put mine," he whispered. "Hold where I hold. Don't look down." She nodded, her face pale in the starlight. Cole started down, showing her the route, testing each handhold before putting his weight on it. Evelyn followed, her movements careful and deliberate. Her riding boots weren't ideal for climbing, but she managed, gripping the rock with a determination that would have made him smile under different circumstances. They were halfway down when the shouting inside the building suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, Cole heard footsteps on stairs, rapid and angry. Then Silas's voice, cold and commanding. "Check on the woman, now!" Cole's heart hammered. They had maybe 30 seconds before someone discovered Evelyn gone. He looked up at her. "We need to move faster."
Can you do it?
"Yes." Her voice was steady, despite the fear in her eyes. They descended as quickly as they dared, no longer bothering with caution, just trying to reach the ground before the alarm was raised. Cole's boot slipped on loose rock, sent a cascade of pebbles rattling down the canyon wall. Evelyn gasped but held on, 20 feet from the ground. 15, 10. The shout came from above. Jack's voice, horrified and urgent. "She's gone!" "The window's open, she's gone." Cole dropped the last 6 feet, landed in a crouch, immediately reaching up for Evelyn. "Jump, I'll catch you." She didn't hesitate, launched herself from the rock face. Cole caught her, staggered slightly under the impact, then set her on her feet. "Run!" They ran for the tree line, Cole half-dragging Evelyn, because her legs had gone stiff from 4 days of captivity, and her skirts caught at her ankles. Behind them, the mining camp erupted in chaos. Doors banged open. Men shouted. Lanterns flared to life. Cole and Evelyn reached the trees just as the first shots rang out. Bullets whined through the branches, too wild to be dangerous yet, just men shooting at shadows and movement. But they'd find the range soon enough. This way. Cole pulled Evelyn deeper into the forest, heading not for his camp, but for a creek bed he knew ran north along the canyon floor. The water would hide their tracks, make them harder to follow in the darkness. They splashed into the creek, the icy water shocking after the warm night air. Cole led her upstream, moving as fast as the rocky streambed allowed. Behind them, he could hear the gang organizing, hear Silas's voice cutting through the confusion with orders. "Dutch! Billy! Circle around to the north. Carson, east side! Jack, you're with me. We'll track them from the creek. Rake, get the horses saddled!" Professional, organized, dangerous. These weren't amateurs panicking in the dark. They were experienced manhunters who'd done this before. Cole and Evelyn pushed on, the water numbing their feet, the creek banks rising on either side. After a quarter mile, Cole pulled her up onto the bank and into dense undergrowth. They crouched there, breathing hard, while the sounds of pursuit drew closer. "Cole!" Evelyn's whisper was barely audible. "Thank you. I knew you'd come." "I knew it. Save your thanks until we're clear." But he squeezed her hand briefly, allowing himself that small moment of connection. "We need to reach my horse. It's hidden about a mile north. Can you make it?" "I can make whatever distance you need me to." They moved again, leaving the creek and cutting through the forest, using game trails Cole knew by heart. He led them in a deliberately confusing pattern, doubling back twice, walking on rocks where they wouldn't leave tracks, using every trick he'd learned in years of wilderness living. But Silas and his men were good. Cole caught glimpses of lantern light moving through the trees, heard voices calling to each other as they tried to cut off escape routes. And when full dawn arrived in maybe 2 hours, tracking would become much easier. They reached Cole's camp, or what was left of it. Someone had been through it, torn his gear apart. His horse was gone, either taken or scattered. His supplies were scattered across the ground. Cole cursed under his breath. They'd found his position while he was making the climb, had eliminated his advantage. Now they were on foot in hostile territory with armed men hunting them, and the only supplies he had were what he carried. "Change of plan," he said, thinking quickly. "We can't outrun them without horses." We need to find defensible ground, somewhere we can hold them off until help arrives. What help? No one knows where we are. Sheriff Dodson said he'd give me 2 days before sending a posse. It's been 4 days now. They're coming. They're just slow. We need to buy time. Cole oriented himself by the stars, rapidly visible in the pre-dawn sky. East would take them toward more open country, where they'd be exposed. South was back toward the gang. West was the sheer canyon wall. That left north, deeper into Devil's Basin, toward terrain even more rugged and difficult. There was a place he knew, maybe 3 miles north. A box canyon with only one entrance, fresh water from a spring, and good cover. If they could reach it before the gang closed in, they could defend it long enough for the posse to arrive. Come on. He took Evelyn's hand and they started north at a pace somewhere between a fast walk and a jog, as fast as Evelyn could manage in her long skirt and riding boots. The sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky when they heard the wolves. Not the distant howls of previous nights, but close, immediate, the sounds of a pack on the hunt. And they were between Cole and Evelyn and the destination. "Stay close to me," Cole said, unslinging his rifle. "Wolves usually won't attack people, but a big pack that's hungry enough might test us." They came into a clearing, and the pack was there. 7 wolves, lean and rangy, with eyes that caught the dim light like coins. The wolves stopped when they saw the humans, assessing, deciding. The alpha, a big gray male with scars on his muzzle, took a step forward. Cole raised his rifle, not aiming directly at the wolf, but making it clear he was armed and prepared to use it. For a long moment, man and wolf regarded each other. Then Silas's voice cut through the morning air, close enough to hear clearly. "They're heading north. Move to cut them off." The wolves' heads snapped around toward the sound of multiple men crashing through the undergrowth. Prey animals had appeared, more of them, louder and easier to target than the 2 humans in the clearing. The alpha made a decision. The pack melted back into the forest, circling around toward the gang. Within seconds, shouts of alarm erupted from the direction of the gang. Men yelling about wolves, guns firing, chaos. Cole didn't wait to see the outcome. He grabbed Evelyn's hand and ran, using the distraction to put distance between them and their pursuers. The wolves wouldn't kill anyone, the men had guns and fire, but the encounter would slow them down, make them more cautious. They reached the box canyon as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Cole led Evelyn through the narrow entrance, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast, and into the canyon beyond. It opened up into a roughly circular space about 50 yards across, with walls rising sheer on 3 sides and the spring bubbling up near the back wall. "This is where we make our stand," Cole said, already moving to the entrance to assess the defensive position. The narrow gap was perfect. Only 1 person could come through at a time, which neutralized the gang's numerical advantage. He gathered rocks and piled them near the entrance, creating cover he could shoot from. Evelyn helped, working quickly and efficiently despite her exhaustion. When they had a rough breastwork built, Cole checked his ammunition. 23 rounds left in his rifle, 6 in his pistol. Not enough for a prolonged siege, but enough if he made every shot count. "How long do we have to hold?" Evelyn asked. She'd torn strips from her petticoat to wrap her blistered feet, had secured her hair back with a piece of ribbon. Despite everything, she looked determined and capable. Maybe a day, maybe 2. Depends on how fast the posse is moving and whether they can find us. He didn't add the other possibility, that the posse wasn't coming at all, that they were on their own until either the gang gave up or they ran out of ammunition. Evelyn sat down against the canyon wall, her back straight despite her obvious fatigue. "Cole, there's something you should know." "About Silas, about why he's doing this." "I know. I found his father's letter. I know about the trial." She looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Edmund presided over hundreds of cases. I can't remember that specific one. But I knew my husband, Cole. He was a fair man. If he sentenced Samuel Clayton to hang, there was evidence to support it. Maybe, or maybe the witnesses lied like the letter says. Doesn't really matter now. Fair or not, that trial is what drove Silas Clayton to become what he is. Revenge," Evelyn said softly. It destroys everything it touches. His father asked him not to seek it, but he couldn't let it go. And now here we are. Cole checked his rifle, made sure a round was chambered. Yeah, here we are. They waited as the sun climbed higher, watched the entrance to the box canyon. Cole could hear the gang in the distance, moving through the forest, searching. It was only a matter of time before they found the tracks leading to this place. Cole. Evelyn's voice was quiet. Yeah? When this is over, if we survive... She stopped, seemed to gather her courage. I want you to know something. Those years you worked at the ranch, I noticed you. I noticed everything about you. The way you were kind to animals, the way you worked harder than anyone else, the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching. I was married, so I couldn't acknowledge it. But I felt it too. Cole turned to look at her, his heart suddenly pounding harder than it had during the entire escape. Evelyn, I'm not finished. Edmund was a good husband, and I honored our marriage while he lived. But he's gone now, and I'm here, and you risked your life to save me. When we get out of this, and we will get out of this, I don't care about what anyone in Silver Creek thinks. I don't care about propriety or social standing or any of it. I just want a chance to see where this goes. If you want that too. Cole crossed to where she sat and knelt in front of her. He took her hands in his, feeling the calluses she'd earned running the ranch, the strength in her fingers. I've wanted that since the first day I saw you. But I thought that I was out of your reach, that the distance was too great. She smiled, tired but genuine. Out here, Cole, none of that matters. What matters is that you came from me. That's worth more than all the money in the territory. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and brief, but full of promise. When he pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears and something else, hope. We're going to survive this, he said, making it a vow. And then we're going to have that chance. A shout echoed from outside the canyon. The gang had found them. Cole stood and moved to his defensive position, rifle ready. Stay back against the wall. Don't move unless I tell you to. He could see them now, approaching the canyon entrance cautiously. 5 men, Silas, Dutch, Billy, Carson, and Rake. Jack wasn't with them, which was interesting. Either he'd been left behind, or he'd finally chosen a different path. Silas stepped into view at the entrance, staying carefully behind cover. Thatcher! I know you're in there. You've got nowhere to go. Cole didn't respond, just kept his rifle trained on the entrance. Tell you what, Silas called. You send the woman out, we'll let you live. You can walk away right now. This isn't your fight. Can't do that, Cole called back. Then you're going to die for a woman who's above your station. That makes sense to you, mountain man? More sense than you know, Silas laughed, a cold sound. Then let's get this over with. The battle was about to begin. The first shot came without warning, a bullet that ricocheted off the rock face above Cole's head and sent stone chips flying. He ducked instinctively, then returned fire, aiming not at the men who were still behind cover, but at the entrance itself, sending a message, come through here and you die. For several minutes, they traded shots in a pattern that became almost rhythmic. The gang would fire into the canyon, trying to pin Cole down or get lucky with a ricochet. Cole would fire back, conserving ammunition, making them respect the narrow entrance. But ammunition wasn't infinite, and Silas was smart enough to know that. He was playing a waiting game, forcing Cole to waste bullets while the gang had plenty to spare. Cole. Silas's voice carried clearly in the mid-morning air. You've got maybe 20 rounds left, I'm guessing. We've got 200. How long do you think you can hold out? Cole didn't answer, just checked his rifle. 19 rounds left. Silas's estimate was uncomfortably accurate. The pattern of fire changed. Now the gang was shooting in coordinated volleys, forcing Cole to keep his head down, giving one of them time to advance closer to the entrance. Cole caught a glimpse of movement. Dutch, trying to work his way along the canyon wall. Cole aimed carefully, waited for a clear shot. When Dutch moved again, Cole fired. The bullet caught the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, crying out in pain, and Billy had to drag him back to cover, one down, temporarily at least. But the cost had been 2 rounds, and Cole was down to 17. Evelyn had found a chunk of broken rock and was using it to dig at the base of the canyon wall near the spring. Cole glanced back at her, questioning. Looking for loose rocks, she explained quietly. If they rush the entrance, we can throw them. Every little bit helps. She was right, and her calm practicality steadied him. They were in this together, and she wasn't going to sit helplessly while he fought. The next attack came from a different angle. Carson, silent Carson who never spoke, appeared at the top of the canyon wall, 50 feet up, looking down at them from above. He had a rifle trained on Cole's position. Cole rolled left as Carson fired, the bullet striking where he'd been a moment before. He came up firing 3 quick shots at the figure above. The third caught Carson, sent him tumbling backward out of view. Whether it killed him or just wounded him, Cole couldn't tell. But now he was down to 14 rounds, and Silas knew they had another avenue of attack. If the gang could get men on top of the canyon walls, they could fire down into Cole and Evelyn's position, eliminate their cover advantage. "We need to move back," Cole told Evelyn. "Against the back wall, under that overhang. It'll protect us from fire from above." They repositioned quickly, taking their makeshift barricade with them. It meant giving up the best view of the entrance, but it was necessary. The spring was right there, so they'd have water. And the overhang would shield them from anyone shooting down from above. The siege continued. The sun climbed toward noon, beat down into the canyon, turned it into a heat trap. Cole's shirt was soaked with sweat. His shoulder, where he'd taken that graze days ago, throbbed dully. Evelyn rationed their water carefully, making sure he drank, even though his instinct was to give her all of it. Around midday, Jack appeared at the entrance. He was alone, his hands clearly visible and empty. "Don't shoot," he called. "I'm not armed. I want to talk." Cole kept his rifle trained on the young outlaw, but didn't fire. "Talk, then? Silas sent me to offer terms. You're running out of ammunition. We can wait you out. But he'll let Mrs. Grant go if you surrender yourself. Says he's got no quarrel with you, only with her." "That's a lie," Cole said flatly. "Yeah," Jack agreed, his voice heavy with something like regret. "Yeah, it is. He'll kill you both. But I had to try, had to give you the chance." He paused, then said, "Mrs. Grant, you were right about me having to choose. I choose not to die for Silas Clayton's revenge. I'm leaving. Going to head south, turn myself into the first lawman I find. Tell them everything, where you are, what's happening. Maybe it'll help." "Jack," Evelyn started to say something, but the young man was already moving, disappearing from the entrance. Seconds later, Silas's voice furious. "Jack!" "You coward. Get back here!" A single shot echoed. Then silence. Cole and Evelyn looked at each other, both understanding what had probably just happened. Jack had made his choice, and Silas had made his response. One more death in a chain of violence that stretched back 15 years to a controversial hanging. "How many rounds left?" Evelyn asked quietly. 12. She nodded, her face composed but pale. They both knew what that meant. 12 rounds against 4 men. And then just his knife and whatever rocks they could throw. The afternoon stretched on, hot and tense and exhausting. At 3 in the afternoon, Cole heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the ringing in his ears from gunfire. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast, coming from the south. The posse had arrived. Silas heard it too. Cole saw him stand up from behind cover, looking south, his face contorting with rage and desperation. He'd been so close to his revenge, and now it was slipping away. "Rush them!" Silas screamed at his remaining men. "Now, before the law gets here!" Billy and Rake emerged from cover and charged the canyon entrance, firing as they came. Suppressing fire meant to keep Cole's head down. It was a desperate move, tactically unsound, but driven by Silas's need to finish what he'd started. Cole waited until they were framed in the narrow entrance, then fired twice in quick succession. Billy went down hard, didn't move again. Rake took a bullet in the leg, but kept coming, limping now, his face twisted in pain and determination. Cole fired again. Rake fell 5 feet from their position. 8 rounds left. Silas appeared at the entrance, his face a mask of cold fury. He had his pistol in one hand and somehow, impossibly, a stick of dynamite in the other, the fuse already lit and burning. "If I can't have my revenge, nobody gets anything," he snarled, and threw the dynamite into the canyon. Cole had maybe 3 seconds. He grabbed Evelyn and pulled her deeper under the overhang, covering her body with his own as the dynamite hit the ground and bounced. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, a pressure wave that felt like being punched by a giant fist. Rock rained down. Dust filled the air so thick it was impossible to see or breathe. Cole's ears rang, his head spun, but he kept himself positioned over Evelyn, shielding her from the debris. When the dust began to clear, Cole raised his head cautiously. The canyon entrance had partially collapsed, tons of rock blocking most of it. But there was still a gap, maybe 3 feet wide, and Silas was climbing through it, his face streaked with dust and blood, murder in his pale eyes. Cole tried to raise his rifle, but it had been knocked from his hands in the explosion. He scrambled for it, his fingers brushing the stock, but Silas was faster. He kicked the rifle away and pointed his pistol at Cole's head. 15 years, Silas said, his voice eerily calm now. 15 years I've waited for this. 15 years of planning and surviving and building up to this moment. And you, a nobody, a mountain man who doesn't matter, you tried to take it from me. Cole stayed very still, calculating distances, angles, chances. His knife was still at his belt, but he'd never draw it before Silas fired. Unless your father asked you not to seek revenge, Cole said, playing for time. I read his letter. His dying wish was that you let it go, make a better life. Something flickered in Silas's eyes, surprise that Cole knew, and maybe a hint of shame. He didn't understand. He didn't know what it's like to watch your father hang for something he didn't do. Maybe Judge Grant made a mistake. Maybe your father was innocent. But killing Mrs. Grant won't change what happened. It won't bring your father back. It'll just add more death to what's already a tragedy. I don't care anymore, Silas said, and his finger tightened on the trigger. I just want it finished. Evelyn moved then, faster than either man expected. She'd found Cole's rifle during the conversation, had been slowly, carefully working it into position. She fired from a prone position, the recoil nearly knocking it from her unpracticed hands. The shot wasn't clean, wasn't instantly fatal, but it hit Silas in the side and spun him around. His pistol discharged, the bullet going wide. Cole surged forward, driving his shoulder into Silas's midsection, taking them both down in a tangle of limbs. They fought in the dust and debris, Silas trying to bring his pistol around for another shot, Cole trying to pin him down. Silas was strong, wiry, fighting with the desperate strength of a man who knows he's dying. His pistol was between them, neither man able to fully control it. The gun went off. The muzzle flash was blinding this close. For a moment, Cole couldn't tell who'd been hit. Then Silas's grip loosened. His pale eyes went wide with shock and pain. Blood spread across his shirt, soaking it black. The pistol fell from his hand. Cole rolled away, breathing hard, checking himself for wounds. He was untouched. The bullet had taken Silas through the chest, just to the left of his heart. A mortal wound, but not immediately fatal. Silas lay there in the dust, looking up at the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. His breathing was wet, labored. "Pa," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I couldn't let it go." Sheriff Dodson's voice came from beyond the collapsed entrance. "Cole Thatcher! Mrs. Grant! You in there? Are you alive?" "We're here," Cole called back. "We're alive, but we need help getting out." He heard the sheriff organizing men, heard them start digging at the rockfall. It would take time, but help was here. They'd survived. Cole crawled to where Evelyn sat against the canyon wall. She was shaking, the rifle still in her hands, her eyes on Silas's dying form. "I killed him," she said, her voice hollow. "I've never killed anyone before." "You saved us," Cole said gently, taking the rifle from her hands. "You did what you had to do." Silas coughed, blood on his lips. "She was right to," he said, his voice barely audible. "I would have killed you both." "Would have enjoyed it." He coughed again, more blood. "Tell them. Tell them it wasn't about the money." "Never about the money. Just wanted them to know what they took from me." His eyes went glassy. The labored breathing stopped. Evelyn leaned against Cole, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her, while she trembled with reaction and exhaustion and the aftermath of violence. Outside, the sounds of digging continued, getting closer. It took the posse 3 hours to clear enough of the rockfall for Cole and Evelyn to climb out. Sheriff Dodson himself helped them through the gap, his weathered face showing profound relief when he saw they were alive. "Good Lord, Mrs. Grant," he said, supporting her as she stumbled on the uneven ground. "We feared the worst when we heard that explosion. Mr. Thatcher saved my life," Evelyn said, her voice hoarse from dust and exhaustion. "Multiple times. If not for him, Silas Clayton would have his revenge. The posse had brought horses, water, food, and blankets." Cole and Evelyn sat in the shade while Doc Miller, who'd insisted on coming along despite his age, checked them over. Cuts, bruises, dehydration, exhaustion, but nothing that wouldn't heal with time and rest. The bodies were harder to deal with. Billy and Rake in the canyon entrance. Carson somewhere on the canyon rim. Dutch had bled out from his shoulder wound. Silas lay where he died, his eyes still open, staring at nothing. And Jack, they found him 100 yards from the canyon entrance, shot in the back. He'd almost made it. 6 men dead, Sheriff Dodson said, shaking his head as they prepared to transport the bodies back to Silver Creek. And all over something that happened 15 years ago. What a waste! Cole handed him the letter he'd found in the trapper's cabin. Silas believed his father was innocent. Believed Judge Grant railroaded him. I don't know if it's true, but it's what drove all of this. The sheriff read the letter slowly, his face thoughtful. "I remember that case vaguely. I was just a deputy then, new to the territory. There was controversy about it at the time. Some folks who thought Samuel Clayton got a raw deal. But Judge Grant was a careful man. If he sentenced Clayton to hang, he must have been convinced of the guilt, or the witnesses lied," Evelyn said quietly. She was wrapped in a blanket despite the afternoon heat, still shivering with reaction. "I'll never know for certain. Edmund never discussed specific cases with me, but I knew his character, and he wouldn't have knowingly convicted an innocent man." "Either way," Sheriff Dodson said, folding the letter carefully, "it's done now. All those lives lost over something that can't be changed. I'll file this with my report. Let the territorial judge decide if there's anything to be done about it." The ride back to Silver Creek took 2 days. They moved slowly, stopping frequently to let Cole and Evelyn rest. The posse treated them both with a respect that bordered on reverence. Word had already spread through the group about what Cole had done, tracking the gang alone, climbing a sheer canyon wall in darkness, holding off 6 men with limited ammunition. By the time they reached town, the story had grown in the telling until it was half legend. Silver Creek turned out to greet them, the entire town lining Main Street as they rode in. There were cheers, questions, tears from the women who'd feared Evelyn dead. Ben Howell pushed through the crowd and gripped Evelyn's hand, his weathered face working with emotion. "Thought we'd lost you, Mum," he said roughly. "Thought we'd lost the best boss the Double E ever had." "I'm tougher than I look, Ben." Evelyn managed a tired smile. "And I had help from the best tracker in the territory." The townspeople's attention turned to Cole, and for a moment he felt the old instinct to deflect, to minimize what he'd done, to slip away into the background. But Evelyn was looking at him, and the pride in her eyes gave him courage to stand straight and accept their gratitude. That night, in the hotel where Sheriff Dodson had insisted she stay while she recovered, Evelyn sat by the window and looked out at the quiet street. She'd bathed, changed into borrowed clothes, eaten her first proper meal in days. Her body was beginning to believe it was safe, though her mind still jumped at sudden sounds. A knock at the door made her tense. But when she opened it, Cole stood there, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way he never had in the wilderness. "May I come in?" he asked, just for a moment. "I wanted to make sure you were settled." She stepped back to let him enter. The room was small, sparsely furnished, but clean and safe. Cole stood awkwardly in the middle of it, this man who'd climbed cliffs and faced down armed killers, but didn't quite know how to navigate a hotel room. "How are you?" he asked. "Alive. Thanks to you." She moved closer, studying his face. He'd cleaned up too, shaved, put on fresh clothes borrowed from the general store. He looked younger without the trail dust, but also somehow more vulnerable. "Cole, I meant what I said in that canyon, about wanting a chance to see where this goes. I know. I've been thinking about it." He turned his hat in his hands, working up to something. "I'm not a wealthy man, Evelyn. I've got my cabin, my traps, and not much else. I can't give you the life you're used to. I don't want the life I'm used to. Not all of it, anyway." She took his hands, stilling the nervous movement. I want a partner, someone I can trust absolutely, who sees me as an equal, who'll stand beside me when things get hard. Everything that happened out there showed me you're that person. I'd be proud to be that person for you. But the town people will talk. Let them talk. I've spent too much of my life worrying about what people think. It's exhausting, and it's pointless. She smiled, and it was her first genuine smile since the ordeal began. Besides, after what you did, you're the most respected man in Silver Creek right now. If the wealthy widow wants to court the hero who saved her, who's going to object? Cole smiled back, slow and warm. When you put it that way. He kissed her then, properly this time, not the desperate kiss of the canyon, but something softer, full of promise and possibility. When they parted, Evelyn rested her forehead against his. "Stay in Silver Creek," she said. "Come work the ranch again, but as my partner this time, not just a hand. We'll build something together." "I'd like that," Cole said. "I'd like that very much." 3 months later, in September, when the aspens turned gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of autumn, Cole Thatcher and Evelyn Grant were married in the Silver Creek Church. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony in front of the entire town. Ben Howell gave the bride away. Sheriff Dodson stood as Cole's best man. The reception was held at the Double E, where the ranch hands had built a platform for dancing and strung lanterns in the trees. People came from 3 counties to celebrate, to hear the story firsthand, to see the wealthy widow who'd found love with the mountain man who saved her. As the sun set and the music played, Cole and Evelyn stood at the edge of the celebration. His arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered. "You know what the best part is? Out there in Devil's Basin, when we were fighting for our lives, I wasn't thinking about the ranch or my reputation or what society expected. I was just thinking about survival, about you, about what really mattered. And what's that? This. Us. Being with someone who sees you for who you really are and loves you anyway." She turned to look up at him, the lantern light soft on her face. "I spent years being Mrs. Judge Grant, playing a role, meeting expectations. Now I'm just Evelyn. And that's enough, more than enough," Cole said, and kissed her while the music played and the stars came out over Montana. The story of their rescue and romance became legend in Silver Creek, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the core truth remained. Sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person who saves you is the one you'd overlooked all along. The Double E prospered under their joint management. Cole brought his knowledge of the land and animals, his patience and practical wisdom. Evelyn brought her business acumen and determination. Together, they built something stronger than either could have managed alone. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done, and they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Cole would take out the compass Evelyn had given him on their wedding day, a fine silver piece engraved with both their initials, and hold it in his weathered hands. "Still pointing true?" Evelyn would ask. "Always," Cole would answer, and she'd know he wasn't just talking about the compass. Some distances could be crossed after all. Some loves were worth riding into hell to protect. And some stories, the true ones, the ones that mattered, ended not with tragedy, but with 2 people standing side by side, facing whatever came next together. That was their story. That was their truth. And it was enough.